This is Minding the Forest, a podcast of the Louisiana Forestry Association. Hello, I'm your host, Jeff Zeringue, media specialist for the LFA. In Minding the Forest, we talk about all things forestry. Forest landowners, loggers, and wood manufacturers such as lumber, paper, and pellet mills all play an important role in the conservation and management of forests for the important renewable natural resource it is. Managed forests offer more for wildlife and water protection, so the LFA advocates to keep forests as forests. This episode of Mind of the Forest is sponsored by First South Farm Credit. First South is your premier rural lender. With over 100 years financing timber and agriculture, they have the expertise you're looking for when financing rural property. If you're looking to purchase or refinance land, call your local First South Farm Credit office or find them online at firstsouthland.com. We have with us today Jim Meeker and Colin Bonser. Thank you. I apologize for that. They are with the USDA Forest Service and have been for quite some time. Jim, you and I have known each other for a while now, and it's been good to visit with you and get to know you. But let's tell the folks who is Jim Meeker, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I'm a forest entomologist, as Jeff said, with the USDA Forest Service in the state and private tribal forestry sector of the Forest Service. So not working on national forest system lands, not working in research, but we provide technical and financial assistance to the national forest system lands and the state forestry agencies in forest health protection. So insects and diseases. And I've been in the Alexandria field office for 22 plus years. And
are you originally from this area?
I am not. I was born and raised northwest side of Chicago in the suburbs. But I came down when I became college age, and my folks transferred down to Houston. I went to forestry school at Stephen F. Austin State University. Loved it, stayed around for a master's, then went to LSU and finished up with a PhD there in 92. Then spent 10 years over in Florida being the forest entomologist for the Florida Division of Forestry before coming back to Louisiana.
You missed Louisiana that much you had to come back?
I did, and we wanted to raise a family in a good place, and Florida was crazy to me.
That sounds like another podcast, but Jim, we're really glad to have you here. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having us, Jeff.
Colin, and you tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm actually a recent hire with the USDA Forest Service. I work in the same department and same group as Jim Meeker here. And so I'm actually from Colorado and was pretty much raised there my whole life. Joined the Navy when I was 18 years old. Navy, Guam, deployed to Afghanistan. After that, I went back to university using the Montgomery GI Bill, well, post 9/11 GI Bill, rather. And after that, I received an undergraduate in ecology and evolutionary biology from CU Boulder. And then I applied for a PhD at LSU in entomology. And I graduated in December of 2022. And, well, I got the job here. The little funny story about that was my wife and I looked at USA Jobs and looking to apply for a job, saw this, and I actually met my supervisor at LSU. He was going to give a talk. And I talked to him, and when I applied for the job, my wife and I were joking, like, how funny it would be. You know, we're going back to Colorado after I graduate, and it wouldn't be funny if I got the job. So apply, move back to Colorado, and the next thing you know, like, oh, you've got the job. So we had to come back to Louisiana. But, you know, overall, we're pretty happy with it. We love the growing season here, so.
It is a great place to be.
Isn't it?
It is.
It is. It really is.
I've been here all my life except for 6 months, and that's it.
Last summer, it wasn't nice.
Oh, God. Well, that's the perils of living in the South, and it's more particularly in Louisiana. And actually, that is about what we're here to talk about today. The drought in Louisiana has lasted what seems like forever, but we live in a very hot and humid area of the country anyway, and so we are prone to have weather events like this. But I think we hear drought and may not understand what exactly is a drought. So how is a drought defined other than just lack of rain for extended periods?
Well, that's the simplest probably and most relatable definition is a lack of water. the absence of water, but there are a lot of definitions for drought. I think I was looking at one of the federal websites, National Drought Mitigation Center or NOAA or something like that, and they said they found 150 definitions of the term drought. Wow. But basically, when we're talking about forestry, trees, and that sort of thing, it's kind of a extended period of deficient rainfall from normal that leads into a shortage in soil moisture, such that trees are no longer able to get or access the water they need for normal life processes.
And trees need a lot of water, don't they?
They do. They do.
Considering the size of many of the trees.
Yeah, it's some of the big ones. I think I've seen estimates of 100 gallons a day.
Wow.
But yeah, they use a lot of water to sustain themselves.
And last summer we had, of course, extended periods of no rain, but we also had extended period of high temperatures in the triple digits. That has to contribute to the problem as well, does it not?
Well, really quickly, I believe we're calling that the 2023 hotter drought event. Is that what we're calling it, Jim?
Correct.
So
the hotter drought event?
Yes, hotter
you
drought.
You picking
event.
on me, or are you saying that for real?
I'm saying that for real. No, that's a real thing.
And it's a real terminology used in the scientific literature, especially as it relates to these events occurring more frequently or on an increasingly more abundant basis worldwide since the 1970s, that not only are drought patterns changing, but temperature patterns are changing along with drought, and droughts are becoming hotter, which exacerbates all of the problems, right? When you get hotter temperatures, you got to use more water to stay cool if you're a tree or anybody. And so, the hotter temperatures are a real compounding factor to this drought. The drought we experienced last year, I was looking at the NOAA synopsis on a statewide basis for Louisiana, and it was basically the 8th driest year on record since 1895.
Wow.
But it was the second driest 6-month period ever on record from May to November, and second driest from June to December ever since 1895 in the historical record for Louisiana. Wow. But it was the warmest year ever.
For Louisiana.
Ever recorded. Yep.
We've seen weather reports here and there in local channels. It was said that Louisiana was drought central. Is that accurate?
At a time, we were. Now, a lot of that has shifted over to Mississippi and Alabama, and our drought has subsided by and large over most of the state except Senla. But that was another thing, looking at U.S. Drought Monitor's synopsis, 2023 year in review, is that U.S. Drought Monitor has been working or being put out for 25 years running. And they said it was the first time in the history, 25-year history of the U.S. Drought Monitor, that any state had reached such a high percentage of the land base in the worst drought category they measure. Exceptional is what they call the worst drought conditions. And 74-something% of the state of Louisiana was in exceptional drought.
Wow.
It was historic in many, many ways. You saw the historical wildfire season we had.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
something 60,000 acres. Which,
exactly.
I mean, if you talk about out west, it's not very much compared to a lot of the acreage that has been burned. But in Louisiana, that seems enormous.
It was historic. It was record-setting, worst wildfire year on record. And that was all drought, temperature, low humidities, also causes greater evaporation and compounds the drought situation. So,
would you say we're out of the drought now? Is it over for Louisiana?
No, most of Louisiana has been restored is out of the drought. But here around central Louisiana, Rapides, Grant, maybe some of Vernon Parish, we're still considered in a moderate drought and have never gotten out of it since we went into it last June. Wow. So looking at the drought monitor, they also do break up droughts into types of droughts and lengths of drought. And since summer of last year, we've been in a short and long-term drought, and still are in central Louisiana.
I know we see rains and we think, okay, well, that's great. Yeah, and it is. It is. But that doesn't mean that the drought's over, as you're saying now. So how much rain, considering what Louisiana averages about, 72 inches of rain a year?
I think more like 60.
60? Okay. Just feels like more sometimes, I think.
Yeah.
So if it's 60 to 65, okay, then how much rain do we have to get before all of that corrects itself?
Well, I think when they went back to allowing for prescribed burns earlier in the year, they released the current meteorological conditions, saying that we were still 9 to 12 inches of rainfall behind where we needed to be.
Wow.
And we came out of the gates. I mean, from January 1 until just a couple of weeks ago, we had 14 and a half inches in a matter of 6 weeks. We were really looking great. But now it hasn't rained in 2.5 weeks, and temperatures are getting warmer, and trees are budding out, and their water demands are becoming physiologically active, and they're going to be requiring more water than they had during the dormant period of winter when it was cooler. Days are getting longer, warmer. Trees are becoming physiologically active. Their water demands are going up, and we need rain.
So just like when we're out working and sweating, we need to consume more fluids. Trees have the same thing as the temperatures warm up.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And one thing I want to add on to this was, so we have just come out of El Nino, the El Nino Southern Oscillation event, ENSO. And so this is when the Pacific Ocean either gets too warm, it gets too cold, or it's neutral of the average long-term event, long-term temperatures. And based on that, can have a significant impact on the weather of the world, the climate of the world. And so, as I was saying, there's El Nino's the warming, La Nina's the cooling, and there's the neutral, as I said. Well, NOAA is saying that there is a 55% chance that we are going to transition to La Nina. There's actually a La Nina watch. And what that really means overall is that we actually might get a very strong hurricane season this year. So we talked about the trees, and I know I'm jumping ahead a bit, but we're talking about the trees. Since we have a lot of dead pine trees, and we're going to talk about in a second, if we have a hurricane, and although we have a lot of these dead trees, not just in the forest, but in urban environments, we're probably going to see might be a bit of a problem. I just wanted to go ahead and put that in there. Those
trees are stressed already from the drought.
Yes, that's right.
And I guess explain, if the trees are drier, is that an accurate depiction? As everything else gets drier, the tree itself is drier. Does that make it more susceptible to damage from winds and things of that nature?
Oh, absolutely. So ultimately, drought's going to stress the tree. And so when you stress the tree, you're putting water stress. There's also, we said there was the heat wave that we had as well. There's heat stress, which is going to affect the organelles, or the overall physiology, or the anatomy rather of the tree. So the drought is absolutely going to affect it. There's also the wind damage. There's also the potential, as we said, up in the fires. Drought's just it's a stress, just like how you and I have stress every day, sitting in traffic, whatever. A tree has that. They can't move though, right? So they're subjected to the abiotic and biotic factors, and rainfall is one of them. And when they don't have enough water, they're stressed. And then there's the chance that they're going to have insect pests or pathogens, or others are actually going to probably end up hurting them and potentially killing them. Yeah.
How are the trees impacted from bugs and insects, things of that nature? Is the drought cause for them to
run amok?
Oh, really? Well, and it's exactly what I'm asking me. Is that going to increase their levels of insects, and that's going to cause more harm to the trees?
I would say potentially, yeah. One thing I would like to say, I know, Jim, you want to jump in, and please. One thing I want to add is that, you're going to actually have, because the tree is stressed and won't be able to prevent insect attacks, is going to have, herbivore damage or Ips beetles or anything of the sort. Jim's absolutely right. They're going to run amok because the plant won't be able to defend itself. So you know how, like, you get stressed and your doctor says, don't relieve your stress because it's killing you, something of the sort.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing applies to a tree. Just, again, the tree can't move. So it's subjected to, I said, all those factors of water or heat or lack of nutrients. Sorry, Jim, you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. When trees are under physiological stress due to drought, they basically start shutting down normal life processes like photosynthesis, like transpiration, metabolic processes that produce plant defenses. And when you think of pine trees, you think of their resin production system. Mm-hmm. It's under pressure within a tree when there's adequate moisture, and it can fight off beetles, right? When bark beetles attack those pine trees, that resin forces them out. Well, they don't produce tree defenses because they're just trying to hang on for life itself.
Wow. Okay.
So they become very, very vulnerable. And the same thing happens with the fungi. They're are allowed to run amok.
We've had several folks either call us or they'll come by the office and they talk about, and it's very unusual for the pine trees as far as my observance over the years, they're not as green as they usually are, or a different kind of green. It's a lighter green, more of a lime green, if you will. Is that a direct cause from the drought?
Some of it could be, but some of it could also be caused by winter chlorosis, which is just a normal annual phenomenon during periods of low temperatures when trees, it's so cold, they're not manufacturing chlorophyll, the green pigment that's responsible for conducting photosynthesis. So you'll get yellow pine trees in the winter regularly. But a common phenomenon associated with drought is the lightening of foliage. You'll see it particularly in deciduous hardwoods. They'll start turning a lighter shade of green, yellow, before browning, wilting, cupping, curling. Trees will dump their leaves early in order to conserve water due to drought. There's all kinds of stuff that gets going on.
Yeah, but we have seen a lot of dead trees, though, along roadsides.
If I can jump in on that. So one of the things about roadsides especially, we've been looking at the satellite imagery, and what we can say, at least anecdotally, is we haven't done extensive research, is that definitely along the edges of pastures or homes or roads, there's going to be increased mortality. And that's more than likely what we're going to, the edge effect. And the edge effect is a microclimate that exists. So you get increased temperatures, increased solar radiation, you have differential wind patterns. And what that does is that actually can increase the stress, but also the water requirements or just the water evaporation in the soil. And so you're going to see, more than likely, you're going to see a lot. And I've seen that as well. Along the roadsides, you'll see that because in the forest interior, you're going to have moister, cooler environments that have less evaporation. So generally, by and large, in the forest interior, you're going to have healthier trees than you will on the edge, if that helps.
So you kind of, it insulates, I guess.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
From the I guess if you can relate it to the wind, when the storms came through, a lot of the trees that were close together and in interior forests really didn't experience as much damage. But if you had a thinning, maybe a lot of the edges, wind was able to whip those and knock those down more easily. Is that kind of like the same phenomenon?
Absolutely. They're more exposed to all of the adversities of high temperatures, wind, sunlight, the heat, right? If it's a roadside tree, it's getting more daylight for longer periods, and during our hot streak, it's getting hotter than interior trees.
So they're safer in numbers.
Well, yeah. Well, kind of in a theory, but at the same time, there's the competition because water's a limiting resource. And if it's too dense, you're going to have higher mortality because there's not enough water to go around. Yeah, it's this weird trade-off. It's a weird balance, balance like Daniel LaRusso and, Karate Kid. It's all about balance,
Haven't seen any trees do the crane, but
No crane kick.
No, but it's Colin makes a really good point. If you haven't been able to thin your trees, your pine plantations in a timely manner, and they're overstocked or at high density, the drought's going to be manifest or magnified in those overstocked, over dead stands.
So that's something landowners really need to look at and pay attention to.
Yeah, but if you haven't done it now, you don't want to be doing it during drought. You don't want to take corrective measures during a drought when pest populations are high, because you'll just be adding further stress and disturbance to the residual trees and attracting in the bugs.
Okay. Talk about the people who find dead trees in their yard, and we had mentioned that earlier, one of you, about in an urban setting, the trees may be more susceptible.
In an urban setting, as I mentioned, the edge effect, there's probably going to be a lot more stressors besides just compared to a pine plantation. You have the wildlife and other trees, but in a urban setting, there's the pollution, there's from exhaustive cars, you have light, you have water requirements. And one of the big things that we're talking about in our office is we've looked at, what have we estimated is about, how we said 112,000 trees are dead. And it's in the state, or did we say in
dead pine trees?
Dead pine
basically
trees.
Within Pineville, Alexandria area and surrounds in Rapides and Grand Parish.
112,000
dead pine trees.
Dead pine trees,
which we can see from high resolution satellite imagery as red fading trees. Since late November, we started looking at high resolution satellite imagery and actually marking. And yeah, it's
And that's in urban and suburban.
predominantly.
Okay.
And that's pines. That we're not talking hardwoods either. So
Really?
yeah, we haven't even scratched the surface with hardwoods yet.
Is it different for hardwoods?
Well, their leaves have been off, right?
Yeah,
So, and the leaves came off early because of the drought. That's one of the drought avoidance mechanisms of deciduous trees, is to dump their foliage early.
Right.
And so without having leaves on, it's very, very difficult to tell, especially from an aerial survey or looking at satellite imagery, whether they're alive or not. And we're about to find out in the course of the next month, when trees break bud and leaves start expanding, how much hardwood mortality has actually occurred. So our focus has been on the pines, but 2011 was a historical drought year in Texas. We had a bad drought, but they had a hotter drought in 2011, and Texas killed 300 million trees.
Wow.
They said 1 in every 16 trees in the state died in that
Good
2011 drought, and that mortality occurred and persisted for up to 4 years afterwards. And they said the hardwoods took it on the chin first and foremost in that year of the drought, whereas there was a lot of delayed up to 4-year mortality occurring in pines as a result of pest populations, Ips bark beetles and such.
Primarily, Forestry Association folks and listeners to the podcast are folks with forests or care deeply about forests. But if we turn to urban forestry for a little bit, and we talked about some of the mortality rate there for the hardwoods, you're saying we don't know yet. Is there anything, someone who has hardwoods, maybe it's a small acreage, maybe it's just a yard, is there anything they can do to take a look and see if, is there stress? Is there something I can do about it? What about those folks?
Yeah, so one thing you can do is the scratch test or the whittle test, depending on how big your tree is. So if your tree is small enough, you can take a scratch test, or like I said, the whittle. You just take a blade and you go to the base of the tree and you scratch off the bark to the cambium, the living tissue. And if it's still living, the tree's probably still living and it can recover. That's probably the best way. But our pathologist, I would be remiss if I did not mention the hypoxylin canker that my colleague Jason Huang wanted us to talk about. So hypoxylin canker is a fungus that affects hardwood trees, not all, but oaks, sycamores. And if you see that, probably your tree is dying. And that is Can you
describe
that?
What does it look like?
Of course I can. It's a grayish, I call it like a smackling, but it's a grayish fungus that's on the bark, and it's gray. And what else? It's gray.
Yeah, gray, black, or brown, and it'll form a big mat, and you'll have kind of the bark will exfoliate, and you'll see these black, gray, or brown mats on the trunk of the tree.
And if it's black, the tree's dead. If it's gray, if it's gray on the trunk, the tree is dying. If it's on the branches, from my understanding, what our pathologist said, you can still be salvaged. But if it's on the trunk, it's dying. If it's black, the tree's dead. there's no point. It's beyond hope.
Okay, if it's on the branches, then, and
That's my understanding.
Can they trim the branches and
that's my understanding.
Treat in any way?
That's my understanding. Yeah, I think the trimming. As far as the other aspect, I'm not sure.
So if it's on the trunk and it's gray and it's dying, is there any chance that it can be saved?
My understanding is no.
Okay. So you're looking at that, you're looking at probably a tree you're going to have to get rid of.
That's right.
Okay.
If it's going to be a hazard, right? So if it's just going to come down and not harm anything, any, personal property,
right,
life or limb, if it's just in the woods, it doesn't need to be taken out. But if it's a hazard tree, then they should be taken down sooner rather than later, because once they start getting punky, it becomes unsafe to take them down. So you want to take them down while they're still relatively sound.
Okay. So if you have more than one hardwood in your yard and you see it on one tree and not on the other, will it necessarily go to the other tree? Will it spread?
Not that I know of, no.
No.
Okay.
But as far as just, I want to piggyback on what Jim said about the dead trees. If they're a hazard, absolutely remove them. But if they're not in any way being going to affect you or anyone or your house, you don't have to get rid of them. So those are called snags, right? And snags are dead and dying trees that are just left upright to naturally decompose. And this is a result of age or fire or drought in our case, if these have them. But that's a natural part of the ecosystem. And so woodpeckers use them, small mammals use them. And we would recommend, if you're not hazardous, you can just leave them up, because it would be a good habitat for woodpeckers and other animals. If you cut it down, then you're removing that habitat. So for the balance of the ecosystem, you can leave it up. Again, as long as it's not a hazard.
Yeah, it's like when we have bark beetle infestations. If the actual bark beetles, the ips or the black turpentine beetle or southern pine beetle, have vacated the tree, there's all kinds of beneficial natural enemies that are still going through their life cycle in those trees. So leaving those dead, vacated pines to promote populations of natural enemies is a useful thing.
Hardwoods too?
I don't know with regards to hardwoods. We don't really have any aggressive tree killing insects associated with hardwoods. Most of them are secondary insects, just like the Ips bark beetles on pine. They're not capable of colonizing, killing healthy trees. They're all kind of pallbearers at the funeral, nature's garbage men taking out the trash.
Yeah.
And they're just beginning the process of decomposing a dying tree rather than being the killers.
Right. Would the exception be the emerald ash borer?
Yes. Great exception. Yeah.
Okay. That's making its way across Louisiana, isn't it?
It is. And I think it's down almost into Rapides Parish. I can't remember if Rapides Parish is on the map. I'd have to. It's been working
close.
its way.
Yeah. Working its way south.
Yeah.
So what else about droughts have we not yet covered?
Well, I have a good anecdote if you want to throw this into
Absolutely.
I like this one. So this is related to insects. So my colleagues, Wood, Johnson, and Billy Bruce, I think a few others. Anyway, they went out and they were at the Stewart Seed Orchard, and they noticed one of the trunk of the pine trees, there was some bark that was wet and kind of oozy-like, and they looked at it, and there was some writhing maggots on it. And they didn't know what that was because as far as we're aware, we haven't seen any maggots that are actively attacking pine trees. So they brought it back to me and I'm interested in flies and Diptera, right? So I let them rear to adults and I try to key them out. And what it looked like is it looked like basically Drosophilidae. It looked like vinegar flies. You know, the fruit flies you get if you leave your bananas out for too long.
Okay.
They're just Drosophilidae is the family, right? So they're flying around. And what I thought was really interesting about that was, why are they there? But what I could reason from it was they needed the female needed a moist place to lay their eggs. So all flies need some sort of aqueous, moist habitat to lay their eggs. They don't do it in dry, right? So they need that goo. And that's what reason is just some fly or a few flies just laid their eggs there because the drought was so bad they had nowhere to go. And we went out try to collect some insects to add to our collection. And we were turning over logs, and this was in, I want to say September, right? We're turning over logs, dry as a bone out there. So, no flies, no decomposers. We couldn't find anything. So I bring this up just because I think it's I think it's an interesting anecdote about how bad the drought was, that creatures that generally don't inhabit or infect, certain hosts are doing it because they're desperate for water.
Is that the first you've ever seen flies do that to a pine tree?
That is the first I've ever seen. What would you say?
I've never seen it.
So there you go.
Okay. Wow. So that's
was
really
kinda cool.
unusual.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
And any other insects that might pop up that folks might be on the lookout for?
Maybe, when I first came here in the early 2000s, Arkansas was just coming off a real bad drought-induced episode of red oak borer. Everybody was all concerned in Arkansas and Missouri about all the dying oak trees, and it's basically been linked to the drought that they experienced and the forest being older aged cohort that didn't have a lot of young or intermediate age stands. They were all older trees. And red oak borer, which is a secondary insect, a decomposer that comes into dying, weakened, debilitated oaks, literally went off the charts in populations and was contributing to the mortality there. So there could be just a general increase in lots of secondary organisms that beetles, borers.
One curiosity is you had mentioned earlier about never address drought problems during a drought, as far as maybe taking some trees or things of that nature. Looking forward, will this cause any problems for the logging industry?
It should provide an abundance of material for them to harvest.
Okay.
And once the drought is alleviated and we get a return of some better growing conditions weather-wise, all of this mortality should dwindle and go back down to background levels and everything. But there should be quite a supply of stands that might need harvesting due to the amount of IPS mortality they've experienced, and it's just not worth carrying further. Just liquidate, clear cut, start over again.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing, when the LSU did a preliminary estimate of the economic impacts on the forestry sector because of this drought, and they produced that report, I guess, back in end of November. And it's still an ongoing situation, right? But they took their best shot at it back in November, and they estimated that the damage to the forestry sector was on the order of $325 million worth of damage.
Wow.
In lost growth, seedling mortality. We talked about the older trees being more susceptible because their demands are greater.
Right.
They require a lot more moisture. But young seedlings is the other end of the super susceptible stage, and they're not established and very sensitive to not having enough water. And so there was a lot of planting failures last year. And then the third sector that they got their numbers of was all the losses due to the wildfires. So lost growth, seedling mortality of plantings last year that will now need to be re-site prepped and replanted. $325 million was their drought impact estimate on the forestry sector.
That's incredible.
And it's ongoing, and they're all still working, to update and revise and bring that current.
So how long do we watch to see the effects of the drought? I mean, it's ongoing. It's better. Most of Louisiana is considered out, as you said earlier.
But it takes time for a tree to recover. Like Colin said, they can't move. And once your photosynthetic system has been damaged, it takes quite a while for that to recover to the extent where it could grow before. So even if we got normal rainfalls, I wouldn't anticipate growth rates being what they would be before the drought during good growing conditions.
Yeah.
That whole system needs to recover if it's going to recover. So, I mean, we're definitely not out of the woods. I would be very watchful, especially as we get into the growing season and enter summer.
And younger trees, I think, as Jim said, are going to be much more susceptible. Younger trees are going to be able to recover better from that type of condition than they're more susceptible, but they're more resilient. Whereas older trees are not. If they experience that drought, they're probably not going to recover. It's going to take them multiple years to do so. Whereas if you have a seedling or something, if it does rebound, it'll actually, if I'm not mistaken, I believe reading that once a plant has been exposed to drought conditions, it's actually more resilient to drought in the future overall. I believe I read that somewhere.
Really?
Yeah. So if they survive it, they'll better suited for the future.
It's like a conditioning kind of thing.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I think it's also kind of a question of, how much stress did you put on the tree? So if, as Jim was saying, the leaves sloughed off of it and it just really just went into senescence, it started dying and then it did recover, it might live, but half the tree might be alive while the most of it might be dead. You know what I mean? Because it starts killing off parts of its body to survive. What I'm getting at ultimately is, I don't know. Can we even answer how long? I mean, it could be, the drought could have had lasting effects.
Absolutely.
On a lot of the trees.
We need to be very watchful, and everybody does, and pray for rain in the right amounts at the right time.
Assuming that we get back to normal weather patterns and we're back up to the 60 plus inches of rain that Louisiana usually gets, we're still looking at years before we may know the extent of the drought.
Correct. Yeah, there are lag effects to the severity of the drought and hotter drought event we went through. There will be lag effects and mortality going on for years, I imagine. And I don't know how much of the suffering trees that have died already because of this event wasn't triggered by prior stressors, such as Hurricane Laura, those trees that didn't come down in those hurricanes. But these hotter drought effects are very heterogeneous in the landscape. We already talked about the edge trees, the urban trees along right-of-ways, power lines, that kind of thing. But those that have survived previous stressful events are more vulnerable, or tend to be. Depends on different aspect. Tree genetics even matter as far as their ability to tolerate drought within a species like loblolly pine.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, so we were discussing earlier that trees that grow on wetter sites, moisture sites, are going to be harder hit. So sweet gum or beech or water oak or my favorite tree, of course, the North American pawpaw, Asimino triloba, is absolutely going to be hit because they're not drought tolerant and they're used to having abundance of water. Whereas if you have trees that grow on drier sites, they're going to fare better because they're more acclimatized or adjust to it, or they're evolved to it.
Wow. So have we not mentioned anything that we should mention to either forest landowners or folks just have trees that they enjoy in their yard?
Well, one thing actually I probably would like to mention, because I figured would be a definition of plant stress or just tree stress, because we use it a lot, but I think maybe just to pin it down, it's a state where the plant is growing in a non-ideal growth condition that increases the demand upon it. So, but a stress could be anything. A stress could be wind. Stress can be someone brushing up on it. Stress could be obviously herbivore damage. Stress can be water. It could be heat. I just thought that'd be important to mention that. But one other thing actually we could discuss is not so much forestry, but more of just the overall ecosystem, which is that with diminished trees, and we mentioned the moist site trees that can be dying off, but also trees that produce fruit. There's a potential that they actually could have been harder hit as well. Some trees and some plants might actually, under stressful conditions, go to the reproductive stage faster, but the quality of the fruit may have diminished because there's more stress on it and they don't have enough time or have enough nutrients to actually produce that fruit. And that fruit could potentially have an impact on the wildlife critters that we have in our backyard, the deer or the squirrels or the birds. So I think that's an important aspect. So the drought doesn't just affect the forest industry. It doesn't just affect the people living in, Alexandria or such when they have trees next to power lines of their homes, it also does affect the overall ecosystem.
I don't know how much you want to offer up to urban landowners, homeowners, yard trees, that kind of thing. Those are places where you can actually do watering and preserve your high-valued ornamental trees around your house that are providing shade and reducing your utility bills. But when you come to watering older, bigger, established trees like yard trees, you want a deep water. It's not like watering your grass. You want to do deep watering and weekly or every other week during a drought if this persists or worsens. And you want to do it during the early hours of the day before evaporation gets hot and a lot of the water evaporates. But you want to get down 6 to 8 inches where most of the root absorbing roots occur is in that top 12 inches of the soil.
Okay.
You want to do a deep, deep watering, which is kind of hours of letting your sprinkler run or using some other soaker hose kind of a system. And if you have big, dead, dying trees that need to be removed because they're going to be a hazard to life or property, please get someone that's a professional tree service that's licensed, insured, bonded, and has workers' compensation insurance for their employees. I think there might be a lot of people running around with chainsaws saying they can do the work for you that could run into
risky.
trouble.
Always risky. There is a list on the Louisiana Department of Agriculture and Forestry's website of horticulturalists who are licensed and or insured.
If we can go quickly into have some notes on heat stress. If we can talk about heat stress.
Yeah, heat stress is
so it's just really important because we didn't just go through drought. We went through a freakish heat wave. Can I say a freakish heat wave?
It was.
I think it's pretty accurate.
All right, so a freakish heat
Yeah.
wave, right? So heat stress is you just we get it too, right? Humans get heat exhaustion and then heat stroke. Thank you. Yeah. And so that's also going to have, debilitating effects. But, heat stress is defined as a period where plants are subjected to high temperatures long enough to permanently alter their function to grow normally. And heat stress, depending on the type of tree, and most trees are C3 carbon fixers, meaning that high temperatures are actually going to restrict photosynthesis, and it actually injures their chloroplasts, as Jim was saying earlier about how their interior physiology is going to start being altered. And so, and ultimately what this does is this inhibits their electron carrying enzymes, and ultimately just the whole system starts shutting down. So they can't effectively process carbon dioxide, and apparently there's ribisco, which is the enzyme that helps reduce CO2. But then if there's too much, in my understanding, it starts affecting oxygen. And then pretty much what happens is that the whole tree just starts functioning improperly, right? That's really the takeaway I'm trying to get. So heat stress just starts destroying the organelles within the leaf tissue and within the whole system. And then the tree just shuts down.
When trees are trying to conserve water, they're shutting down their stomates, right? They're holding the water in. And when they're doing that, then photosynthesis starts to shut down because they're not bringing in CO2. If it gets worse, transpiration starts shutting down. So
what's transpiration?
That's the movement of water through a tree from the roots all into upwards and throughout a tree that's required for cellular metabolism. And it eventually leaves the tree through the leaves, the stomates, the pores in the leaves, as water vapor. So you think of it about sucking on a straw, and you get to the bottom of the drink, and you're getting all these air bubbles in there, and you can't get the liquid out.
Yeah.
So water's in a continuous connective tissue in the xylem, all the way from the roots, from the soil, and the fine roots all the way up through the tree and comes out as water vapor. So there's evapotranspiration. Trees are losing water all the time. Well, if they close their stomates, photosynthesis shuts down, transpiration shuts down, and leaf temperatures actually go higher than air temperature because like sweating, like a human sweats, it's a cooling process. Well, if the trees have closed their stomates, leaf temperatures can actually 9 degrees higher than air temperatures. So if we got to 108 degrees Fahrenheit last year, you think about the needles of a pine tree being 117, you're approaching thermal lethal levels
Wow.
of just causing needle death.
Incredible. So if someone has questions still about all that which we talked about, is there a way that they can contact you all and ask more?
You can go ahead and contact me. My email is colin.bonser@usda.gov. That's COLIN period BONSER @USDA.gov.
Very good.
And mine would be just about like Colin's, but with my name, James.Meeker @USDA.gov.
Jim Meeker and Colin Bonser of the USDA Forest Service. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having us. Really appreciate it.
Yep, thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to Minding the Forest, a podcast of the Louisiana Forestry Association. This episode of Minding the Forest was sponsored by First South Farm Credit. First South is your premier rural lender. With over 100 years financing timber and agriculture, they have the expertise you're looking for when financing rural property. If you're looking to purchase or refinance land, call your local First South Farm Credit office or find them online at firstsouthland.com. If you'd like to learn more about sustainable forestry and the LFA and its programs and how you can be part of an organization that supports landowners, loggers, and wood manufacturers in the state, go to laforestry.com. You can also send comments and suggestions to me by email at jzeringue@laforestry.com. That's JZERINGUE @laforestry.com, or check out the show notes for our contact information. You can also subscribe or click the button to get notifications when a new episode is dropped each month. Remember, at the Louisiana Forestry Association, we're Mind to the Forest for you.